Welcome to Farm Connections. I'm your host, Dan Hoffman. On today's show, we visit with a family who's been in the dairy business for 126 years. They share important advice on how to successfully move the farm from one generation to the next. Then we take a step back in time to visit the Pickwick Mill. Established in 1855, this mill ground wheat for local farmers until it switched to livestock feed in 1920. Today you can visit this historic mill and watch the water wheel bring everything to life. And Lynn Kittleson reports on the accuracy of the harvest forecast. Stay with us, Farm Connections is up next.
Welcome to Farm Connections with your host, Dan Hoffman.
Farm Connections, sponsored by Alcorn Clean Fuel, a farmer-owned cooperative in Claremont, Minnesota, produces ethanol, high-protein livestock feed, and corn oil and beverage-grade carbon dioxide for resale to benefit its members and their communities. Absolute Energy, a locally owned facility, produces 115 million gallons of ethanol annually, proudly supporting local economies in Iowa and Minnesota. Absolute Energy, adding value to the neighborhood. Prow Company, a hands-on commercial property leasing company. Leasing commercial properties in Rochester, Minnesota since 1952. Realtors and brokers welcome. Prow Company.
Welcome to the New Day Dairy near Clarksville, Iowa. With me is the Bolin family, and we're going to talk a little bit about transition and succession planning in regards to agriculture. Neil, you would like to tell us about some history, I'm sure of it.
Well, my grandfather George settled in this farm in 1890. He already had 5 children. My dad was born 2 years later in 1892, and he was married in 1916, and my grandfather moved to town. To this union, 3 boys were born, I'm being the youngest, and the farm was 80 acres when he moved here. It expanded to 120 about 3 years later. And in 1944, when my dad was operating it, he bought this 40 where this new facility is located on. And he bought this 40 acres for $2,000, $50 an acre.
Dave, you're the next generation after Neil and Mavis, and then we'll bring in Pam and her parents in a minute.
Yeah, he talked about, deciding which son got to continue the farm. I don't know if it necessarily had to be the son, but I was an only child with 3 sisters. So I guess it kind of came down to me. But I became interested when I was in junior high milking cows and kind of had a little herd of my own and milked them while I was in high school. And I think I had 15 or 20 that my little sister and my mom got to milk when I went to Iowa State University. And it was during my senior year that we built what we used to call the new barn before this one was built down in the valley at the original homestead. We built a 65 cow freestall barn with a milking parlor on it. And it ran continuously till last December when everything moved up here. And so like my grandfather, I had 3 sons, and Dan's the middle son. All 3 boys were pretty interested in agriculture, but Dan decided a few years ago when he was kind of doing some consulting work that he decided that maybe he would rather do it hands-on rather than tell other people how to do it. But it's a great way to raise kids, and we're certainly glad to see another generation get to grow up on a farm.
Dan, you kind of had the vision that you would be a dairyman, and you looked at the facilities and some other things, and what were your conclusions back a few years ago?
Yeah, so it would be over 5 years ago now that and even almost 6, that I kind of came to the conclusion, I think the future path, at least for the next 25 or 30 years, and things can always change, but I felt like in the longer than shorter term, the path for Lynn and I, the place where we would raise our family, would be what I would call my home farm, where I grew up. And so Lynn and I made the decision to move back to the area. We were living in Turkey at the time, and we moved back to Iowa. And at first, we just joined back in with Mom and Dad in the current operation, helped things keep going there. And then I began the process of thinking and kind of crafting what is the future vision, the future path forward. What is it going to take for me to be the next generation of caring for cows and managing the dairy farm?
It probably looked a little daunting.
Yes, absolutely. It's and even up until the point we started, and even now, I feel like dairy is, and transitioning with the dairy is kind of like remodeling an airplane mid-flight. And there's never really a good downtime to say, let's take a break, let's walk through some options, let's hit the pause button. It's always in process, always going. Every day there's a sowing and a reaping that occurs multiple times in the day.
So when you look at that, you're fresh back from Turkey, you probably don't have a lot of cash, maybe not even access to borrowed money. How'd you overcome those obstacles?
I'm an idea guy. and so I am very blessed. Lynn and I, our family is very blessed. We took on one of the best venture capital guys you ever could, your own grandfather. So Grandpa Pete was around in the process of all of this planning and shaping and researching and saying, what's the best path forward? And the robotic milking entered the picture, looking at different things. And Grandpa got as excited as I did as the vision began to become clearer and emerge of what New Day Dairy was going to become. And Grandpa said, well, if you can't do it by yourself, let's do it together. I'm in. And so this is really not Dan and Lynn's New Day Dairy. This is the family's New Day Dairy. And this is on Grandpa Neil and Grandma Mavis's land and standing on their shoulders, standing on Grandpa Pete and Grandma Mary's shoulders, standing on Mom and Dad's shoulders, and I would say well over half of the herd just recently is mine, but used to be their herd, their genetics, and their breeding, with a lot of my influence in the last several years. And so it's hardly me at all. There's so many outside players and supporters that just make me look good when I'm out here day to day.
During that time, what was the most stressful part?
I don't know if any was too stressful. I went and talked to my other grandkids for one thing, see if they was all right with it.
Why was that important to you?
I wanted to know their feelings, because everybody think everything is fair and equal in Harrington, and Dan's going to work for this part of his inheritance, and they're going to inherit maybe part of this dairy. Who knows? But I wanted them up front with my feelings.
Did you get honest feedback?
I think I did. And I asked my other kids, and I asked all my blood Glengarrian kids.
It sounded like the entire family did a great job of building their bridge before they needed it.
I think it's important, if anything, in a business of any size, is to try to solve problems before they happen, instead of trying to fix things after they happen.
Neil, I think it was very important. You put some seed money in terms of the 12 acres. That was the yeast, that was a catalyst, that was collateral, that helped something happen. But I heard something else. We're going to ask Dave about that, but it seems like you, or appears like you skipped a generation. It wasn't to Dave and Pam, it went to the grandchildren. Dave, can you talk about that?
Yeah, and I really think it's great that it worked out the way it did. I think at one time Pam and I had every intention to buy the rest of what was the Bolin farm, and over the years, Dad came out and helped up till just a few years ago, and was a great part of our operation, Dad and Mom, and it just worked out that we had never pulled the trigger and bought it, and now when this opportunity came along, that it really worked out great that Dad was able to help out that way. And I really feel great that it skipped a generation. I'm very proud of Dan and Lynn and the fact that they could buy it from their grandpa and work with their other grandpa. You know, there's not very many people their age that have all four grandparents still alive and working with them and helping them out. And you know, it's really great. I'm very happy about it.
So Dan, you broke the mold a bit. You moved outside of the area to find a spouse. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so Lynn and I met when we were down at Iowa State University. I went and followed in my older brother's footsteps and was studying dairy science, and she was in business management. But we were both within the Greek community. I was in a fraternity, she was in a sorority, and we met through some of those events.
My mom knew there was somebody special in the picture when I came home and said, "Oh, I think I could be a dairy farmer." So because I grew up in the cities and you know, Maple Grove, Wayzata area, and so I was a big city girl.
I guess I'd like to add that the one thing Lynn has really contributed is coming from a different area. I think she helps us to look at things a little differently, and sometimes she's a firstborn kid, and Dave and I and Dan are all middle kids. So we all tend to kind of, when we work together, we just kind of roll with the punches, get things done. Lynn is our organizer. She is our business manager when we get together with our farm meetings. And early on, she's the one who said, we're going to sit down, have an official meeting with the other brothers and sisters. And each of them called me and went, is everything okay? I'm like, yes. We just want to sit down formally to assure that you're comfortable with this going on here. And like Dad said, we'll support those other children in other ways as we are, you know, but this, you know, our herd coming here. And we're very thankful that the other sons and daughter-in-laws are supportive of this and that we did that step. And I credit Lynn for that because she comes from a little different background, looks at things a little differently. And I think that's really helped us get to where we are is her insight and her business degree.
Pete, were there any outside experts, consultants, or lenders involved to make this all happen?
Dan and I worked as consultant with 3 different lenders, and we chose the one from Cedar Falls, production credit, and then I also put some money in and got shares for that.
What about the actual structure of the business entity itself? Any accountants or lawyers?
We dealt with the lawyer from Shawrock, Epley, and he drew up our plan for in case something happened to me, going out, put in there that they can't foreclose them down for 20 years for my shares, give them 20 years of lead time to get the payments made.
Lots of thought went into it.
And we also consulted with the tax people in Waverly.
Before we even got to that stage, we dealt with a lot of great advisors that were just helping us frame the family transition and the farm transition, and whether it's on the technical side, so even a group like the Coalition to Support Iowa Farmers and looking at the siting, whether it's better to be adding on new buildings at the previous farmstead site tucked down by the creek in the valley, or to look at new sites and ideal sites like this one situated on top of a hill on some thin soil that kind of poorly grows hay at best, but otherwise is an ideal site for a building site for a dairy and managing manure well. And so that was a player. We had a farm transition advisor that we had family meetings with, especially on the Bolin side, to sit down with all of the extended siblings and talk through what does this look like? How do we discuss fair and equal? And like any relationship, whether it's marriage or it's siblings or it's even jumping the generations, communication is so important. Even if you say hurtful things potentially within that context, well, now we can do some peacemaking. We can talk through. We can ask why questions. Ask why do you feel that way, and so it's very valuable the amount of outside input and advice and support that we had in the process.
Nice, and it looked like it brought forth good things.
Absolutely.
We also took a class through a program Iowa Farm Bureau has called Take Roots, and it was about a lot about the communication, about what advisors to use, and it was a session they had, and because we were still milking, you know, and obviously busy at the farm down there, we took turns, whether Dan and Lynn went or Dave and I, but they just had a 6-week session, I believe it was.
3 weeks.
3 weeks, and you guys went to some of the sessions and you got worksheets to fill out and homework. But I think that's a good program. It also just helped us define our goals, what we wanted out of this, what Dan and Lynn wanted moving forward, how, you know, how does it work out, and as Dan said, to talk about it.
With this kind of support, my expectation is that the Bolin family will be here for the 6th and 7th generation, but it won't be without some challenges. But with this support group, I think they're in good hands. Stay tuned for more on Farm Connections.
Thanks, Dan. Farm safety is a year-round proposition. However, safety awareness is heightened in the fall each year as more farm accidents occur at that time of the year than at any other time. Fall is the time of the year when farm operators are busy with the harvest season, as well as when seasons change and day length becomes much shorter. All of these factors tend to make fall a prime time for increased farm accidents. The U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention found that there's 1.85 million full-time farm workers in the United States. The Department of Labor found in their most recent data that 475 farmers and farm workers died in farm-related accidents, which makes farming among the deadliest occupations in the United States. In addition, an average of 167 farm workers lose time from work each day throughout the year from farm-related accidents, and about 5% of those result in permanent disability. The Center for Disease Control also found that there's about 472,000 youth working on farms across the United States, youth that are 19 and under, and out of this, about 113 die each year in farm accidents. Tractor overturns are a leading cause of death on the farm. One way to prevent deaths and injuries from tractor rollovers is to have rollover protective structures. As recently as 2006, a study found that over 40% of the tractors in the U.S. did not have the proper safety equipment. Another problem leading to farm accidents is fatigue during farm work, and this is especially true in the fall. Reduced sleep, poor eating habits, and other things can lead to more fatigue. Another major hazard in the fall is when farmers are moving equipment and hauling grain on rural highways and roads. Farmers are encouraged to use flashing lights and slow-moving vehicle signs. The non-farm public also needs to enhance their awareness during the autumn season, especially in the morning and the evening when the autumn sun is a factor. Farm safety in the fall and throughout the year is not just about farm families, but involves all rural residents. While farm operators, families, and their employees must be keenly aware of farm safety procedures in and around farm sites and crop fields, all rural residents must be more astute regarding travel on rural highways and roadways. Farm families should review their safety procedures in and around the farm, and all rural residents are encouraged to pay extra attention when driving on rural roads in the fall and to stay off cell phones while driving. I'm Kent Tesey, and we'll see you next time.
The Pickwick actually got started because of this mill. The two gentlemen come up from Ohio and staked a claim on the land and built a cabin so they'd have shelter, and then that was 1854, and then that fall when it got cold they went back to Ohio, and then the next spring, 1855, they came back and they brought 5 more families with them so they'd have help to put this up. They actually built a sawmill here first. Yeah, when they, the two wives that came up here, the one had read the Dickens papers, and she liked that, and that's how she happened to name the town of Pickwick, was because it was in the Dickens papers. Well, I'm Vic Gardner, and I've been with the Pickwick Mill here for about the last 16 years. When they came up here and seen that the stream was here and it had a good drop on the land here so they could put in their dam, And it's a spring-fed stream about 4 miles up the creek here. There's a big spring that feeds that, so it's a steady flow of water. When they first started here, when they had the 5 families, they built a sawmill so they get the material to put this building up. And then they started on this building and took 4 years to put it up. And the stone all came from a local stone quarry. And when you consider that this was all hand done, you know, I mean, they didn't have all these big hoists and stuff. It's kind of hard to believe that they moved all this stuff in here like that. When they were grinding flour all the time, to begin with, they were grinding wheat. And they used to raise a lot of wheat up on the hills. And they claim they came a long ways, but I can't believe that they came too awful far because they were coming with oxen and horses. And you did not have these nice roads. It was down through the ditches and through the water and what have you to get here. And they couldn't, their wagons weren't that big, they couldn't haul that much in them. But they were bringing it here to sell it. Well, when they brought it in, down on the main floor, which is the 3rd floor, they unloaded it into a hopper down there, and that's hooked on a scale. So they could weigh it, and they knew how much they were bringing in because they were bringing it here to sell. Once they weighed that, then they opened the door in the bottom of that hopper, and the grain would go clear to the bottom floor. Down there, there's a big holding bin down there, and there's a conveyor belt that runs all the way from the bottom floor to the top floor that has buckets on it that carries that grain way to the top. And then they could direct it where they wanted to go, if they wanted to put it in storage or if they wanted to grind it. If you look at the walls, you see there's plaster on the walls about 8 feet up or 6 feet. And that's because they were storing wheat up here. They always used to say that keep your nose to the grindstone. That's because that's how they could tell how to adjust their grinding stones, because they could smell that flour. If it was getting warm, they had it too close together, they'd have to separate it. And because once you got that flour too warm when you were grinding, that would kill the germ and then it would not bleach out like it should. Once they ground it, they went up to the top floor and it got spread out where it got bleached and stuff. And nowadays they use a chemical to bleach flour, but in them days, if you just left flour alone, it will bleach itself. Well, when they were grinding flour 24 hours a day, they were grinding for the Union Army. And they shipped the flour overseas and all over. And they would take it down to 2 miles down here to the river, and then they would put it on a boat and a rail and ship it out. It's living history, and if we didn't preserve it, once it's gone, it can never be replaced.
Many farmers across Minnesota and the upper Midwest wonder if big crop estimates coming from USDA and other sources are hitting the mark. USDA is projecting near record crops, and ProFarmer and other private sources see a good year coming. Gary Hochfeld is an extension specialist with the University of Minnesota. He says the projections do have an impact.
Crop reports can be very interesting, they can be helpful, but they can also be a little bit deceptive. Again, they're showing record yields in Minnesota, near record yields US-wide, but there are a lot of crop consultants that right now aren't agreeing with those reports. And one of those reasons is because of all the moisture we've had. With the soils that have remained basically saturated, I mean, they haven't had a chance to dry out, that's creating some crop disease problems.
Hochfeld says farmers are concerned about some heavy rainfalls late in the season and their impact on harvest.
Just read a report this morning from a crop consultant in Arkansas. They're seeing aflatoxin in the corn and root disease, root rot in soybeans. Those can cause harvesting issues, also grain quality issues, especially with the aflatoxin. If it's a corn grain, it's being fed, it can be toxic to livestock. Also reduces the quality, which unfortunately reduces the price.
Projections are one thing, but farmers won't know actual yields until they're in the field.
If it didn't rain anymore, I think we'd still end up with a really good crop, both corn and soybeans.
At this time of year, there's not a lot to focus in on except how big is the crop going to be or how small. At this point, USDA and other sources are saying it could be a bin buster. However, farmers are saying it's too early to know. There have been late season rains, and at this point, we don't know the size of the crop until it's in. This is Lynn Kettleson reporting.
It's great to see the sustainability of agriculture across the generations, whether it's milking cows or bringing in the harvest. Looks like we'll have a lot of stories to tell about agriculture for a long, long time. I'm Dan Hoffman. Thanks for watching Farm Connections.